Hello, today I'm here for the second half of my May wrap up. If you want to see what I read in the first half of this month, I will link the video down below. I had a really good first half of the month, and admittedly this half of the month wasn't as positive. So let's get straight into it. I read 4 books in the second half of the month, and I started with Whistle in the Dark by Emma Healy. I actually went to see Emma Healy speak at Toppings in Bath at the start of the month, and I very rarely pick up a book straight after getting it. In fact, I don't think I've done that in a very long time, but I kind of get annoyed because when I do get round to books, they're kind of done and over and people are over them. So especially as I went to see her speak about this, I wanted to get to this pretty soon. I was kind of having a bit of a book hangover after the positive start that I had to the month, so I was struggling to actually get into anything, so I thought I'd pick this up. Firstly, I will say it's absolutely beautiful. The reason that it's all shiny is because Toppings cover their books in plastic, and I just think books covered in plastic always look best. But it's really a beautifully produced book. I love the end papers, and also a little surprise under the cover. I love hardcovers that have little surprises like this. I think it's just a lovely touch, and it's always a pleasant thing to find. Emma Healy is the author of Elizabeth is Missing, which won the Costa a few years ago, and kind of became a really big deal. And I read Elizabeth is Missing at the start of the year, actually, when I found out that Emma Healy was going to be coming to Toppings, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I've also developed a really intense creative crush on Emma Healy. I just think she's gorgeous, and she seems so lovely and shy. I think she's quite a shy person, but she's also so intelligent, and I love listening to her speak. So going to see her was absolutely wonderful. Sadly, this book kind of didn't appeal to me. Now, I will say going into this that I was on a book hangover when I read this, so that might be why I think I was probably in a place where I didn't really want to read, so I wasn't that motivated to pick it up. But there were a few things that kind of didn't quite sit well for me with this. So basically this book is about a family, and it's mainly about the mother and daughter in that family. The mother, Jen, is quite overprotective of the daughter Lana, who is 15 but has been dealing with depression and issues like that. And we meet them in the aftermath of Lana disappearing for 4 days, and the predominance of the book is sort of from Jen's point of view, trying to work out where Lana went, what happened to her during these 4 days that she was missing, because Lana says that she can't remember. She claims that she doesn't know what happened to her, and obviously she's lying. She just doesn't really want to tell the truth, and she sort of leads Jen on a few false clues and things by purposefully letting her overhear conversations. And it's sort of, as Jen is on this journey to find out where Lana went, she's kind of on this journey to get closer to her daughter, and strangely enough, this looks at the roles switching a little bit, because at times obviously Jen mainly is monitoring Lana and being overly protective of Lana, but there are also times when Lana feels like she has to watch Jen. What I liked about this book was that I think it really wonderfully described the relationship between a mother and daughter. I especially think it's interesting because when I was growing up, for example, my mum was a very protective mum, but we didn't have things like social media. I mean, we had MySpace, but it wasn't really something that your parents used, you know, it was something that only teenagers kind of knew about. Whereas now, obviously, parents use things like Instagram and Twitter and Facebook all the time. And it looks at the issues that brings up, and the fact that Jen, you know, constantly checks Lana's Instagram, and kind of tries to work out what the statuses mean and what the pictures are, and I think that's a really interesting thing, because it's not something that I certainly in my generation would think about, but I can imagine that my mum would have got pretty nightmarish if she could constantly check my social media, and I think she would have been exactly the same as Jen is. Ultimately, this book kind of left me a little bit flat. I think it just needed more love and time to become an overall book. I feel like it was rushed, and I understand that's probably not Emma Healy's fault. I'm sure she had a lot of people trying to force her into writing this book as fast as possible. But I feel like it could have done with probably about 6 months more editing. I just feel like it's kind of the scraps of a novel that have never quite really come together to glue into a proper book, if that makes sense. Also, one of the things that I really didn't like was that it has got chapters, but within the chapters you have little paragraph sections, and some of them are only about that thick. And the purpose of that, Emma Healy did speak about at her talk, was that she wanted to appeal to people who were reading on their commute or whatever and only had a few minutes to read. But ultimately I don't think it overly worked. I think it kind of ended up just being really choppy. I don't think it stylistically added anything necessarily to the narrative. Anyway, overall, it was an okay book. It was 3 stars. There was nothing I didn't like about it. I just found that overall I wasn't overly fussed about picking it up, and it didn't particularly grab me, which was a shame. But as I say, it might just have been because I was in a bit of a slump at that time. Then I read my non-booktube book for the month, which was The Flame Alphabet by Ben Marcus. I have done a separate review of this, which I will link down below. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It was probably the best book I read in the second half of the month. I've had this on my shelf for a very long time and never got round to it. So as I'm reading non-booktube books this year, I thought I would give it a go. This is a book which is kind of set in a dystopian world where language has become toxic, particularly the language of young people and children. And it looks at how the parents of these children deal with that situation, and also the fact that over time the world becomes completely silent as people try to work out a new way to communicate. It's a slow burner and it's very literary, but it's beautifully written, and I think the thought behind it was so stunning. As I say, if you want to know more, check out my individual review, but I would highly recommend this one. Then I read, this is a library book, and it's called Astrid the Unstoppable by Maria Parr. It's translated from Norwegian by Guy Pusey. I picked this up because I am currently in the finishing processes of writing a children's novel, and I kind of wanted to just get an idea of the children's novels that are out there at the moment. And this one caught my eye in the library because I don't know if you can see, it's actually illustrated by Katie Harnett, who illustrated Franklin's Flying Bookshop with Jane Campbell. So that's what kind of caught my eye about this. This is basically just about a girl called Astrid who's living in the Alps, and she kind of lives in this private skiing area which is quite out of the way, and she's the only child in the valley, as it were. So she just goes about having adventures, and her best friend is an old man who's been keeping a secret from her, and the secret comes out in the novel. Overall, this was really sweet. I quite enjoyed it. It's very simplistic. I think it's kind of aimed for younger middle grade kids rather than like my novel's probably aimed for children a little bit older, but I thought this was really quite sweet. Overall, I think there could have been a little bit more narrative to the plot. I think even though the story follows this secret that her friend has been keeping, it kind of is just a sort of vignettes of these little adventures that Astrid had. I feel like there could have been a more leading overall purpose to the book, but I enjoyed it. It was really quite sweet, and to be fair, I'm far over the target audience. Then I finished the month with This Trick Is to Keep Breathing by Janice Galloway. I've had this on my shelf for a while because I really liked the title, I'm not going to lie about it. I think this was written in the late 80s, but Janice Galloway has released in recent years Jellyfish, which I've seen quite a few people talking about on BookTube, so you might recognise the name from that. This is basically it's the diary of a woman who is going through a breakdown because of circumstances in her life that I won't go into because they kind of become revealed to you as the story goes on. I was a bit worried about this because I really like mental illness discussed in books, and I think it can be done really effectively, but it can also be done quite badly, and the characters can be quite badly drawn, I suppose. It's kind of at times a little verging on being like that, but ultimately I really enjoyed this. I think the times when I associated with Joy, the main character, were quite frankly frightening, but I think she's drawn really well as somebody who's just got, there's not a specific mental label that you could put on her, but she's just generally having a bit of a hard time. She's getting very anxious about other people, and she's generally just struggling, and she's trying to just live day by day, or just keep breathing, as it were. I think I'll read you a bit because I think that's the best way to describe sort of how this book is written. So this is when she's having a conversation with a psychologist, I believe. I'm starting to hate things. I hate where I work. I see small things about too many small people and it makes me bitter. I don't want to be bitter. Bitterness hurts. I'm lonely. I'm afraid I'll go sour and nobody will love me anymore. Something about me kills people. I'm losing days and drinking too much. I'm not a proper woman. I no longer menstruate. Sometimes I think I don't exist. I keep looking for the reasons and never find them. Waiting all the time, but I don't know what for. I always do the wrong thing. It's all kind of written like that. It's quite, there are some really poetic sentences which really cut to the bone, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's also interestingly written, because it's obviously a diary format, which again I think can easily be done quite badly, but this is not just your normal diary format. So ultimately it is just her diary, but she also puts letters in there and imagines conversations in there, and it's kind of funny at the same time as being quite frightening and quite affecting. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I would recommend it. It's quite a good read, and it's really quite short. There's not much writing to a page, and it didn't take me long to read at all. So if you do want to get around to that, I would recommend doing so. And that is everything I read for the second half of the month. It's not been awful. There have been 2 4-star reads in there. I've just been in a bit of a fug with reading, to be honest. I've not been overly pushing myself to read, and I've kind of been wanting to do other things this half of the month, which I'm fine with. I think sometimes it's nice to just take a break and watch television or something instead of reading. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and I've kind of been not overly investing in the books I've been reading, which might be why I had a bit of a worse time. But anyway, it's been fine, and hopefully things will pick up at the start of next month. Please let me know down below what you've been reading in the second half of May, and I will see you next time. Bye!